Please join us in welcoming President and CEO of Associated Luxury Hotels International, Michael Dominguez, and CEO of International Congress and Convention Association, Senthil Gopinath, in discussion with Skift Meetings Editor-in-Chief, Miguel Neves.
First time in these swivelly yellow chairs?
Yeah, absolutely. It looks
kind of a Jetsons thing. It's kind of cool.
I love it. So just a quick housekeeping note. I see a few bags on seats, and I think there's a few people kind of starting to sit in the back rows. We'd love to have everybody sit in these round tables in the middle. So if you don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, anybody having a bag, if you could move forward, we'd really appreciate that. But just a quick housekeeping. So nice, light, airy venue, really fascinating first session. Now we're going to be talking about this light topic, geopolitics. We're gonna get into this. So November the 5th, we have something coming up in the US. Something might be in your agenda, something might be happening. One US president election, you might have heard of it. One of 65, at least, happening around the world, and the EU one as well. From a business perspective, and I'll start with Michael, what would you prefer from a business perspective to see on this map? Do you want to see a red map? Do you want to see a blue map?
I'd love to see a purple map someday, you know? And I do think, candidly, in the US specifically, that there is more moderation if you think about the overall population, because I think what we tend to forget, you just asked, are we red or blue? A third of voters are independent. And it's the independents that call every election here in the United States. And those independents are the ones that keep swaying. And that is why the elections are sometimes a surprise, because we forget the Democrats tend to stay blue, the Republicans tend to stay red, and we have a big group in the middle that's as large as both of those groups that tend to call it. I think what's really interesting when you show the map, there was the Cook report a few years back at a US travel meeting. They actually showed us the map and the outcome of the map. And it was when President Obama won in 2016, and then when President Trump won in 2020. And we talk about how different the world is. The maps were identical from red to blue. And what they showed you was 3 different counties in the United States moved the election for President Obama, and 3 different counties moved the election for President Trump. That it was that small a margin. But we talk about that it looks so different. I don't think it's different. What I do think is you have a bunch of independents trying to find something that's a more moderate voice, while we tend to have extremes on both sides. And something you said about the 65 elections, I always say 60% of the world GDP is having an election this year. Yep. To me, that's more critical than what happens here. The one thing we find out is we'll continue to move on, regardless of the outcome.
But if purple is kind of where you think it works, isn't uncertainty bad for business?
It is, but candidly, what hasn't been uncertain over the last 5 or 6 years?
Good point.
I mean, uncertainty is, I think, part of our world today. And the one certainty we have is that there's a lot of rhetoric when you're in a presidential election specifically. We do know much of that policy won't ever make it through a Senate that is razor thin. We think we're going to have a split government. Right now, all odds are the Republicans will take the Senate and probably lose Congress, which means you have a split government once again. And if you do that, these wild proposals aren't going to happen. They just won't go through. So I'm paying more attention to what happens in Congress and Senate, because candidly, that's where the legislation will actually move through.
Okay. Senthil, with your international view on the world, you're based in Amsterdam, originally from Sri Lanka, I believe, right? So why is it important for us to really think about politics and be thinking about these things? I mean, we're the meetings industry, we're the doers, we're setting up these crazy events, we're doing all these different things, we have so many things on our mind. Why politics as well? Why should we?
Thank you, Miguel, for the question. Thank you for having me here. I think we meeting industry, over many decades, we have been used to do what we do best at what we do. I keep repeating twice. Why? Because we keep looking inwards. But geopolitics is one of the key fundamental driver of our industry, invisibly, if I may say. We are a very visible industry. I like to call it a visible industry. But invisibly, that makes huge impact on our industry. Yeah. If I may give a quick example, in the last 24 months or so, I had the privilege of meeting almost 46 plus politicians across the world, from North America. You talk about going up to China and many parts of the world, Asia, Latin America. Everywhere, every meeting, you realize that we tend to talk about why we are important, what's the economic impact we create as an industry. But they're not interested in that. They try to identify what you're bringing to my country, what you're bringing to my city, what changes you make. So their decision-making process is primarily based on that. So any changes on geopolitics really have a direct impact. We might not see that when we organize our event or we are busy with our day-to-day life for 12 months of the year. But you suddenly see the changes, the wave of impacts coming throughout the following years. We'll see that, oh, what has happened to this market? Why the meetings have gone down? Why the healthcare science meetings have changed? That's because the decision-making process of the health minister in that particular country, so that it impacts the tourism minister follows suit. And then we see a drop of growth or change or legislation change creates a huge impact in moving forward. So all our colleagues in the audience and in the industry across the world, they think of infrastructure development slows down, and they also curtail the investments. Think about skills development goes down. So it has immediate impact on all those aspects.
Yeah. Miguel, I wanted to add too, there's a little bit of a danger for us that there's a nationalist movement going around the world, and we already have an argument of over-tourism in certain areas around the world, and I don't think that benefits us long term. So that is why, because you asked the why is it important, those are the things that can be important 4 or 5 years down the road.
So you're looking for something that's not uncertain, not polarized.
Exactly.
Easy.
That's why I watch TV and sitcoms. You know, literally, that's not polarization. So it'll be good.
Exactly. You mentioned something interesting. You meet these politicians, and I think when we were talking about this session, you're saying you have to essentially meet with them every 4 years because the governments are changing.
Absolutely.
Are you having an export conversation with them? You're saying these meetings are actually exports. You're bringing money into the country, and this is why it's important. Is that the type of conversation that you should be having with them, rather than venues and things like that?
Yeah, I think one step back, Miguel, yes, definitely how it benefits as an export, and it brings economical benefit to the nation. But yes, every 4 years when we have a new politician, it's more of their mindset, their vision, their plans which they come out with, the mandate where they talk from election manifesto to what they want. What they plan to do. So they expect that our storytelling has to be on those lines, So yes, exports is understood. You get tourism coming in, you get delegates attending congresses, they become eventually investors, bring economical benefit to a country. But more importantly, what meetings industry aligns with my vision. Okay. So that's what you have to recreate that story every 4 years or 5 years. So we as ICCA, I keep talking even my team across the world, you have to redo it. There is no other choice. You need to.
Is there no way to get some continuity there?
I mean, you'll be surprised. There are so many countries, many continents. Even the same minister re-elected or same president, prime minister re-elected, it's a new mandate altogether. Because they need to showcase to the local public what they are doing, what they have not done in the past. So we get sort of pulled into that, and so we need to tell our kind of story back again. And of course, we are good at that, because we are one of those most innovative industry, if I may say that. We try and test everything. So we have a very good platform. I mean, like what you're doing today, you're getting the leaders together. Yep. That story we can talk to the ministers constantly. Yeah.
You mentioned a bit this nationalism, right? That sort of inward-looking protectionism thing. I mean, that's unfortunately happening all over the world. Does that really put our industry in danger? Because if people don't look at the outside world as much?
I don't think it puts us in danger, but it puts us at risk at policies that could be restrictive for our ability to meet and travel in certain areas. Yeah. So I don't want to over-sensationalize it. I'm worried about policy that comes out of that. Yeah. And when you have residents and communities that are voicing their opinion very loudly, the politicians care about votes. And we can talk about our economic impact all day long. They care about staying in power. And that's where I think we're challenged, that we have to at least be conscious enough to understand that's a risk for us. Yep. And we have to be better at telling our story and understanding what that looks like.
One of the things we talk about a lot is this idea of planners and the meetings industry talking the language of business when you speak to corporations. I think what you're saying here is you have to talk the language of politicians.
You do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we tend to talk about economic income or economic output and what that looks like. And yeah, that matters. What matters most is votes. And I used to remind people that when you're talking to your leader, whoever your political leader is, make sure you're reminding them you're a voting person, that you're somebody that can or cannot vote for them. because that's where the impact's going to be, and that's what they pay attention to. They're looking at their constituents and trying to really
and
try
I
to listen
think
to that.
to adding on to Mike's point, more than economic impact, we have spoken even coming out of pandemic, extensively we have focused on that. The politicians like to hear about job employment development, skill development, and local communities, how they're benefiting. I think going forward, 25, 26, we need to change our narrative to start focusing on those areas. And then, like you said, that's where the votes they look for. So in many countries, when you talk about economic impact, unfortunately, it becomes a fraction of the local GDP or the local exports what they're looking for. So maybe we have to look at that angle.
That's a very important angle. You mentioned already some of this polarization. I think during some of the U.S. White House, you had visa issues. Trouble people getting visas to come into the U.S. and you also had travel bans of certain countries. That was a big challenge. Are we heading in that direction again? Is this election going to make a decision whether that's going to be an issue again?
No, I really don't think so. I mean, the travel bans you mentioned, that was long ago and in a different time period for a variety of reasons. The visa issue is still an issue. We're getting better, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. When you still have an average wait time that's close to 400 days and 43% of the travelers to the United States need a visa. They're not part of a visa waiver program. So we've actually had groups that have told us they are completely avoiding the United States right now because they have a large international contingency and they can't be guaranteed to do that or to get them here. And that's a concern. I had a call with one of our clients in London, and their large contingencies from India. And that's a challenge on the visa side. And they were very nervous. We were able to put them with U.S. Travel because they do have a bat phone to the White House to be able to try to move that from a group perspective. Because we do realize while they're trying to fix it, we need to have some type of protection for people that want to come in.
Yeah, and absolutely. Plug for the session later this evening. If you're joining us again from 6 p.m., the Department of State is going to be here. And I think that might be something we're going to be talking about later. So there'll be something there. So let's talk about this. This is a chart here from Skift Research talking about the slowing international travel rebound. And in particular, I want to talk about the two conflicts that are up there, Hamas-Israel conflict and the Russian offensive on Ukraine. And I wanted to get an idea in the audience. Have you been impacted directly or indirectly from these two conflicts? Have you had people not come to your meetings, afraid of joining? Can I just get a show of hands of anybody who's directly or indirectly been impacted by these conflicts? Okay, interesting. Not a huge amount, but let's say maybe 10% of the room. So how is this impacting you? Because obviously there's the direct impacts, people from those countries, zones, flying zones, et cetera, there's challenges there. But what are the indirect impacts? Maybe you, Senthil, think about that.
Thanks, Miguel. I think indirect impact is the cost has gone up very high because the aviation industry has to look at very different alternates or different ways of moving people across. So I think that's fundamentally the first part of the impact, I would say. So that impact comes into the conference delegates. So when you put a package price together, that we see that more and more, if you avoid that zone, fly to different zones. In terms of attendance to Congress, I think even the ICCA Congress is in Middle East this year in Abu Dhabi. We see that as not really impact primarily because I guess probably the industry professionals are well informed. They know, they go around all these Congress. Even the statistics of 23 clearly showcase the healthcare meetings, which are coming back, the health science meetings or technology. The numbers are growing bigger in terms of attendance. They are not larger like 10 years ago, but smaller segments of Congress, new topics are coming. So yeah, I think that's the way forward. And of course, I guess social media and then the technology in today's world. You've been well informed what's happening. So, and people are trying to avoid it as much as possible. That's what when you asked about the number of people who raised their hands, it's clearly evident that we need to do business, So from a leisure tourism perspective, it probably have a bigger impact, not on the meetings industry.
Have you seen any indirect impacts?
Not really, just the flight impacts. And I think the outcome, when you look at that, number one is cost. To your point, it literally is raising costs in certain parts of the world. We have all our Kempinski brands that are around the world. The Russian issue is a big issue because the Russian traveler was a big component of their business, and restrictions that are in place in certain countries has made that very prohibitive for them. So that is a direct impact out of that conflict. But I think it's interesting when you looked at your chart how big the drop is from economics than to everything else. And again, that is going to continue to probably be the driver, but I think some of these things are driving some of the economic pieces to it.
You mentioned the Russian issue. We just wanted to get if some properties are seeing the opposite, because
Yeah.
there are restrictions
Agreed.
somewhere,
Yeah.
and they actually end up going there.
Yeah, it is a yin and yang, because they're going somewhere and they're still traveling. They're just not traveling where they used to. So it's an impact to my customer or one of our members, because they used to have that contingency for a while.
Just a reminder, if you have questions, please do put them in the app. We'd love to get audience questions as well. We talk about sort of, MPI has this slogan, when we meet, we change the world. Is it presumptuous of us to think that good meetings can actually change the world?
Now, when back in 2012, when I was chair of MPI, there was that video that we had. I thought that was the most impactful video to tell you that that's not presumptuous. It's real. And what it showed you is through the history of time, every great movement in our society, every great medical advancement has come from bringing people together. It's never come in a vacuum. And in the United States, our country was born from a meeting. We had a Continental Congress. That's what literally was the birth of our nation. So I don't think it's presumptuous at all. I think we sometimes forget the importance of bringing people together. And we started this with, I'd like everything to be purple. I wish we could have civil back in civil discourse. I think meetings is one of the best things that literally can, and we've talked about this in the past, and this is presumptuous. I think we are probably one of the greatest medicines for ignorance and bigotry and racism around the world, because the more we get to interact with different cultures and different people, the more we understand the differences. Yep. And I think it's ignorance that drives a lot of that, and I think meetings are one of the most powerful tools to be able to beat that.
Are they the cure for ignorance?
Yeah, absolutely. Just listening to Mike, just to add on to that, I think probably over a period of last decades, if you take, Miguel, what have we had done, yes, meetings changes the world. I've seen in countries far as Southeast Asia, you go into Latin America or even Africa, meetings have made huge impact by even setting up clinics. For example, Cleveland Clinic never thought of going outside US. Now they, through a conference, they set it up in Abu Dhabi. Same in Africa. The problem is that our ignorance, right word used there. I think we tend to get, again, like I said at the start, to do what best what we are doing. But we tend to forget that story keeps going into the local community, to the politicians, so that what changes we made. Again, it's investment and knowledge. Mm-hmm. Many parts of the world, the meeting industry is still struggling to grab what we are doing and how do I put this piece together. It's not about filling my conference center or meeting planner, getting the balance sheet better, but they are not, they don't have the knowledge to put this puzzle together. That's where the challenge. If we can succeed with that, I think meetings changes the world. That's the answer.
And even in a couple of simple forms, I actually had that thought process at IMEX Frankfurt this past year. When I looked at that exposition hall, I said, nobody is caring what part of the political aisle we're on. When we're together, we were together for a cause, and it was about our industry. And I do think, coming out of COVID, you've read about the level of depression, the level of loneliness, and people still feeling lonely, and some of that carried over. I think do not underestimate the impact of us bringing people together for the human connection. And if we're making people just feel a little bit better when they go back home and curing some of that loneliness, that might be a little Pollyanna, but when we're together, it triggers all types of chemicals in our body that make us feel better. And I don't think you can discount that. That, to me, sending all those people away feeling good, it makes the world just a little bit of a better place.
Yep. You mentioned IMEX. We were at the IMEX Policy Forum, and the theme was good meetings, not more meetings.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that statement? Is that something that is built into how you see the world going forward? And I'll start with Mike.
Yeah, I do. I think we spent so much time trying to figure out how to meet coming out of COVID, just getting back to meeting. We forgot why we're meeting. And I do think people are doing that now. We are really trying to figure out what is the outcome, what are we trying to get to. We were talking backstage, we treat our meetings like a laboratory. That is really with purpose and thoughtfulness to be able to say, how do we teach while we're there, and how do we experiment and try things? But I see that across the board. I do think people, and there is a need though. Yep. Coming out of the pandemic, there was just a need to get together. because people hadn't met for so long. But I do think right now you're really seeing a focus on what is the objective, and does this require a meeting, whatever the reason we're getting together is. Because there are some things that don't require a meeting that we used to get together face to face. But I think that is not only critical, I think it's happening.
If you can do it on Zoom, it doesn't belong in the room.
You should, yeah. If you can do it on Zoom, do it on Zoom.
I'm going to correct you there, Michael. Wonderful thought by IMEX saying that you need good meetings, not more meetings, which is happening. If you really see moving away from pandemic 22 onwards, many of the associations, the survey said last year, ICCA survey also we looked at, 48% of your business, the generation is through meetings. But they have realized over and over again to look at more structured. So if you take, for example, diabetes as a discipline, under that we would have had 2,000 meetings in the past, or plus meetings in database. But now we see that that's more structured, more falling in place, more continents coming together, meeting for the good of that particular discipline. So it's not about numbers anymore, it's about purely focused and structured meetings happening. Okay. And then definitely it's no Zoom, in-person meetings is the best. In-person
meetings, okay, but when you talk about developing countries, countries that are really looking to develop their industry, to have internal meetings, external meetings, everything happening, what does that look like in terms of a sustainable industry? If you take a country in Southeast Asia or in Africa that's really sort of at those early steps,
right.
Like where do they want to be for it to be sustainable and focus on good, not more? Because I think at the moment they just want more, right?
Correct. Yeah.
What does that look like when we get to the good part?
Yeah. So pre-pandemic, it was always about I need international delegates for my Congress. Mm-hmm. So they have moved on with that thought process, becoming more strong national and regional meetings. Okay. So that's becoming quite evident. That's what you see that going back to our initial discussion about politicians justifying their investment or understanding or identifying whose meetings industry, the national and regional meetings are hugely assisting. Yep. So from the growth factor point of view, we are really growing as an industry across the world using that model. Yes, you will have 20, 30, 40 international meetings in a small city, but they're predominantly focusing, the associations are focusing on national and regional meeting. Mm-hmm. That's becoming more sustainable on a long term. And also it's a model they want to work with because they know they can achieve that rather than putting up a big show together and waiting for 1,000 odd international delegates coming together. And the cost factor is fundamentally inflation in many countries is driving models of that sort of models really well.
So that look inwards might not be so bad if you're organizing a lot of regional and national meetings in many ways.
Well, and I think your statement originally, maybe you have to separate the more mature meetings industry from those that are emerging. Because in the emerging, it is about getting together. It's the mature industry that we're talking about that we really have to understand our purpose, because that to me is a whole different variety of why we're getting together.
So what good meetings might be slightly different depending on the maturity.
Exactly.
Okay, so I want to start to wrap up, and I had a kind of a call to action question, but I'd like to get to this audience question, which is somewhat similar. How do we reassure our customers, clients, that they should move forward and invest in meetings when they fear the election outcome? We've kind of covered a few things, but is there a kind of a call to action, or kind of where would you start with that?
Well, the one thing I would start with is there's not a single policy, specifically here in the United States, that is being talked about from either politician that has to do with our industry. So what would be the fear? And what would be the thought process? And I think sometimes we go down rabbit holes of sensationalism versus understanding all proposals right now are economic proposals. And you're hearing a lot about taxes. You're hearing a lot about economics. You're not hearing a thing about travel, the world, restrictions. None of that is on the table. Okay. And there shouldn't be a surprise with either candidate, because both candidates have been in office one way or another. So we kind of know what that looks like.
And Senthil, I'll ask you the next question. I know it's a US question, but I think you have an external view as well. What can US-based planners do to help advocate for more inclusive visa policies?
I think the planners here are some of the leading planners are based in this part of the world. It's to create that awareness with the Capitol Hill, with the leading policymakers, to talk about why it's important economically, and knowledge exchange takes place in our meetings. So they could be the best advocate for me. This is exactly, I was even in New Zealand, I was talking to the Foreign Affairs Minister of New Zealand. You're far away, your visa policy, you want to build the industry, but your policy has been so restrictive to getting people in. So they formed a task force among the meeting planners, of course with the DMOs as well. They said, let them recommend, let them sort of bring a thought process to the legislature, then we may make a difference. And they did that, you know. So New Zealand is a classic example there. So I urge the meeting planners around here, if you can be the voice, I'm sure that will really build your business better and get people easily here.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. That's all we have time for. I hope you enjoyed that and you got a little bit clearer on the geopolitical issues that are impacting the meetings industry. Michael Dominguez, Senthil Gopinath, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.